The concepts of ethics and accountability in the justice system is one that's been a pretty common underlying theme throughout my whole criminology degree. However, I've never had the chance to focus on this topic as a whole. Over the course of this semester, I was introduced to a number of different mechanisms of accountability and portrayals of ethical questioning in forms that have rarely crossed my mind, such as Antigone and the moral dilemmas and discussions that arise from themes it reflects. However, I found that the concepts of open justice were quite interesting, especially in the modern sense, where we discussed how ethics and accountability has changed over time. The work we did in week 4, where we discussed mechanisms of accountability in institutional context and concepts of whistleblowing, ethics, and the law, they intrigued me the most. These themes and concepts brought my mind back to a subject that I completed last year, critical issues in criminology, where I wrote a research essay on technology facilitated violence and the impact of online discourse. So in this essay, I got to briefly touch on the work of Tully O'Neill's paper, Speaking Out, Speaking In, and the safety work in the digital sphere. I specifically referenced this essay as Tully O'Neill was one of my lecturers in 2022, and I found that the work she did was really interesting as she spoke about it with such passion, and it really stayed with me over the course of my following subjects. So Tully's work revolved a lot around digital activism, digital criminology, anti-queer violence, and sexual and gender-based violence. So a lot of discussion around vulnerable populations. I was really fascinated by this subject matter, and the freedom of this research topic offered me an avenue to look deeper into these issues in relation to ethics and accountability and open justice, which is a perspective that had not previously crossed my mind. So in saying that, workshopping the exact topic for my research question was quite difficult, knowing that I had a specific interest in vulnerable populations and the growth of the digital space. I was excited to link these concepts to ethics, accountability, and open justice, as I think it allows you to explore and reflect a pretty holistic view of both sides of the concepts. So my final research question was, how does open justice influence accountability in cases involving vulnerable populations, and what ethical implications arise from the media coverage and public scrutiny? I found that the best way to set out my essay was in a way that discussed 2 positives and 2 negative impacts of open justice that it has on vulnerable populations, and specifically how these impacts are seen in today's society. The reason I mention this is because I didn't plan to set my essay out like this from the get-go. Rather, as I was researching and looking further into the impacts of open justice, I found that each positive aspect is almost evenly balanced with a negative aspect, and vice versa. And the only way to fairly reflect this research into my essay was to structure it exactly in the direction my research process took. And I think it reflects a very real depiction of the justice system as a whole and the constantly changing views of society. Reflecting on the intersections of open justice, accountability, and the media involvement, it reveals a really complex balance between transparency and potential risk for vulnerable individuals. So the concept of open justice obviously emphasizes public access to court proceedings as a mean to uphold transparency and trust in the legal system. However, I found that it raises ethical dilemmas when involving vulnerable populations, and the question became more, what's important, the rights of the system or the rights of the individuals? This reflects an ethical dilemma in itself, which I think is really well revealed across this essay, as the questions of positive or negative implications purely depend on whether we're speaking on behalf of the individuals or behalf of the broader community. However, discussions of advocacy, systematic change, and larger scale movements that arise from publicity surrounding the injustices of vulnerable people suggest that there's an overlap when recognizing and spotlighting these issues, and it's come a really long way in fostering a demand of accountability in society, just in general. And this is now a very big common theme that we see across cases and in the media and through public outrage, like online. As involvement of the media and online platforms has developed so rapidly, it's becoming hard to gauge where and when open justice and accountability crosses the line of moral and ethical issues. However, I think it's an extremely important aspect of the justice system that's continually changing, and it's going through this time of development, so discussions and research on this topic are at the height of their importance.